Welcome into the official Jets podcast.
I eat, breathe, and sleep the New York Jets, my team.
That is a tightrope walk across Niagara Falls. That's hard to do.
It's a game of inches, so finding that one little inch to be successful, it all matters.
The official Jets podcast is presented by Kendra Scott, the jewelry company that's shining bright and doing good. Shop game day ready jewelry styles and so much more at kendrascott.com.
Welcome into the official Jets podcast. Eric Allen here inside the studio, joined by Leger Douzable. Dudes, we're about a week into free agency. The Jets have been very active on multiple fronts. Your overall thoughts, 30,000-foot view.
Yeah, I think there's a theme when you look at a lot of the players that the Jets picked up in free agency. The main theme being all of these guys are under 30 years old. And then when you look at a couple of these guys, they're coming on, I don't want to say down years, but not as productive as the 23 years. So when you look at Aaron Glenn and his, past and developing players, they looked at guys that have high upside that are still very young, that probably still have their best football in front of them. So I think the Jets were very strategic going into this free agency, making sure they targeted certain players that were not over 30 years old. Even a guy like Derek Nadi, and I know we're going to go into each player specifically, but this guy has been a starter for majority of his career. Didn't start last year, but still can play at a high level and is still not 30 years old. So I think I don't want to use the word reclamation projects, but essentially that's what AG and Darren Muji did, right? They went and got some of these younger players that are coming off years that weren't their greatest years in the NFL, but still a lot of upside to them.
Do you think that speaks to the confidence that Aaron not only has in himself, but his staff, that we're going to be able to take some of these guys who might have struggled most recently, and we're going to develop them in-house?
Yeah.
And then the other side of the coin of that is, hey, if these guys don't come along, a lot of these deals, dudes, are team-friendly.
Without a doubt. And I think they structured those deals where they can get out of a lot of these deals. A lot of them are one-year deals, but a couple of the deals they can get out in 1 or 2 years. So I think it was smart by this staff. And it also, like you said, speaks to the confidence of Aaron Glenn and his developmental skills. The thing is, when you're watching players and then you see it done correctly on tape one time, that means they can do it again. And I think that's what Aaron Glenn is thinking. There's so much that goes into a player, his psyche going into a contract year. And a lot of times players are so worried about playing their best football that they play a little tight. And that could have been an issue. I mean, Cisco, I know we'll talk about him later, but that whole secondary struggled in Jacksonville. That could be not just on him. It could be schematic-wise what they were asking him to do. So AG looks at the 23 tape and says, this guy was unbelievable. Let's get him on our team. He's also a local kid, I believe, from Long Island. So it's going to mean something for him to come back to the Jets. And I believe I can get him back to that player that he was in 2023.
All right, who are the Jets getting in Justin Fields? This guy went 4-2 as a starter last year in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
A lot of the media reports are the Steelers wanted him back. Instead, he said, you know what? I'm going to the Jets. Again, he's coming off a season where he started those first 6 games. Russell was injured. He had 10 touchdowns, 10 total touchdowns, 5 on the ground, 5 passing touchdowns. He turned it over just twice.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing, him protecting the football, because that was an issue when he was a younger quarterback. And the crazy thing is, I say a younger quarterback, this guy literally just turned 25 years old, and he's been in the league, it seems like, forever already. So this is a young guy with a lot of upside. You talked about him taking the Steelers to a 4-2 record in the beginning of last year. We know how dynamic he is with his legs in the open field, and what people don't talk about enough is how physical he is when he becomes a runner. He's extremely hard to bring down. So you always hear the terminology +1 in the run game. That's what Justin Fields gives you. But don't get it twisted. This guy can throw the pill. Let's not forget, DJ Moore's best career year was with Justin Fields. Not all the other quarterbacks he played with. It was with Justin Fields. So he can definitely throw the ball down the field. And I think also with Derek Muji and also AG, they looked at this and said, he's got some synergy and some continuity with our number 1 receiver, right? Because he played with Garrett Wilson in college. He played with Jeremy Ruckert in college. And oh, by the way, we signed his center and Josh Myers to bring him along as well. So he's going to have some familiar faces on this team where he feels comfortable, knows he's going to be the starter from day one. And we're praying and hoping that we can continue to develop this guy. And maybe there's a potential for him to be the long-term franchise quarterback for the New York Jets. And I think that's what Justin Fields was looking at and why he decided to sign with the New York Jets, because he knows there's an opportunity, if he shows right, that he could potentially be the quarterback of the future.
6'3", 227 pounds. He just turned 26 years old, and he's coming off a year in Pittsburgh where he set career highs in terms of completion percentage and passer rating. What do you think about his fit in the system? Now, Tanner Engstrom has not called a play. We know
Correct.
that. We know he's a passing game coordinator with the Lions, but just looking at the personnel, and I really like the explosive element potentially offensively when you got Fields taking snaps under center, you got Breece Hall behind you, and then you got Garrett Wilson as your number one receiver. Those guys all can take a ball and go 50-plus to the house.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it'd be interesting to see Tanner Engstrom put his handprint on this offense. And what will that exactly look like? We don't know, because to your point, EA, he hasn't called games, right, from the offensive coordinator standpoint. Now, I did love the signing of Scott Turner to help him out. He's a guy who's called a lot of plays as his time as an offensive coordinator and been a coach on the offensive side. So I think those two will come together to have an offense tailored to Justin Fields' skill set. Could we see more RPO, right, with Justin Fields? Because that's an element of his game that separates him from a lot of other quarterbacks. And also, when you talk about the subsequent pieces on the outside of Garrett Wilson, but then also in the backfield of Breece Hall, you have to talk about this young offensive line. Let's not forget, Tanner Engstrom, where'd he come from? The Detroit Lions. What do they want to do there? Run the football. You don't think he's going to want to run the football with this young offensive line the Jets have? Right, when you look at the youth of this offensive line from the Jets, besides John Simpson, everybody else is essentially the starters on rookie deals. Now, there is a needed right tackle, and that could potentially happen in the draft, or there's still some free agents out there as well. But when you talk about a young, hungry offensive line, right, gelling together, they're going to want to run the ball with Breece Hall to take some pressure off Justin Fields. And let's not forget, we talked about it earlier, EA, Justin Fields is going to be part of the run game, right? He's going to be +1 in the run game as well. So I'm excited to see what Tanner Engstrom does with this offense when he puts his handprint on it. What will be the philosophy for this offense, and what will its identity be? I can't wait to see that.
Man, this whole podcast could be on Justin Fields, but let's stay here for a second. You played defensive line in the National Football League for more than 10 years. What kind of pressure does a guy like Fields put on the defense, that front seven? Because you mentioned the RPOs, the zone reads, the design runs, and then also just making a second play with his feet.
When things break down and there's nobody open, and you could have the perfect defensive call, EA, with a guy like Justin Fields, it doesn't matter, because he can break down the perfect play with his mobility. And I talked about his strength. Like, it's hard to bring him down because you talked about it, 6'3", 227 pounds. Like, that's a big running back in the league, right? So, like, that's tough to bring down in the open field. And then when you have him in open space and he's able to break contain when the defensive line doesn't have pass rush lane responsibility, now you're talking about him one-on-one with his dynamic ability, with his mobility and speed on a linebacker. He's going to win that 10 out of 10 times, because that's how dynamic he is with his legs. So it puts so much stress on a defensive line, because you want to be aggressive when you rush the passer, but you got to be smart too, because if you're too aggressive and you end up having a big open A gap because both D tackles decide to rush on the outside of the guard, and now there's a gaping hole, not only is it a passing lane for him, but he can keep the ball and run in that A gap and pick up first downs. We saw that multiple times last year with the Pittsburgh Steelers, more specifically on third down. You got to think about this, right? This is a defensive-minded coach in Aaron Glenn, and he knows with the skill set that Justin Fields has, he could just keep the offense on the field by scampering and picking up some first downs with his legs. He wants to be able to control the ball and play good defense. And with a mobile quarterback like Justin Fields, that's why it's so tough for defenses to scheme against.
This is a hell of an opportunity for Fields. Where does he have to get better? When you watch the film and say, okay, listen, he's shown glimpses. He's the former number 11 overall pick in the draft back in 2021. He had a streak there a couple years ago with the Chicago Bears where he became the second player in NFL history to have at least one rush touchdown and one pass touchdown in 5 consecutive games. The only other player who's done that is Kyler Murray in 2020. Where does he have to get better, Fields?
Yeah, so you go back to last year when they're 4-2, and Mike Tomlin makes a tough decision to go with Russell Wilson. It was because the lack of the deep passing game. Now, we talked about EA. He's gotten better every single year when it comes to completion percentage, but the accuracy down the field when you want to try to get some of those explosive plays to keep that safety out of the box so you can run the ball effectively, that's where he has to take his game to the next level. I saw him grow in progressions, right? Going through his progressions last year, he got extremely better than that, better than he was his first couple years in the league, because it used to be the first read wasn't there. It was a tuck and run, but you saw him last year get to his first, second, and third read and get the ball out of his hands. Now he has to put it all together and be able to throw the ball down the field and complete some of those big passes down the field. Again, Tanner Armstrong comes from the Detroit Lions. They're going to want to run the football, but the way to get that extra safety out of the box, you got to threaten the ball down the field, and the team has to respect that you can make that throw down the field. So that's where Justin Fields has to continue to grow as a player from the quarterback position. It's the accuracy on the downfield throwing.
How much of the emphasis in this attack on the play action game is going to help Fields?
It's going to be monumental, right? We talked about this young offensive line. John Simpson is a guy that will rip your face mask off as well. Now, again, it's to be determined who potentially is the right tackle. I know me and you, EA, have been through some scenarios. Could Josh Myers slide into center? Could Joe Tippmann move to guard? Could AVT go back to right tackle? I think all that is up to be determined, just depending on what the Jets do for the rest of free agency, because I know it seems like it's been a month, but to your point, EA, it hasn't even been a week of free agency yet. Like, there's still a lot of good players out there to play. And I know people get enamored with the opening day or when the new league year starts or the tampering period starts, because everybody's like, why isn't this team doing this? Why aren't they doing that? We're not even a week into free agency. There's a couple waves and tiers of free agency. There's that initial wave, then there's the second wave, then there's a quick small wave right before the draft, and then after the draft, there's another wave for free agency where teams didn't get to pick the certain players that they wanted to fill out the roster. That's that last wave before training camp. So we're still a long way away from determining what this team will look like because of the personnel, and the Jets still have a lot of pieces to add as well. So you talked about the play action pass game. It's going to be monumental, right? But you have to be able to establish a run to have an effective play action pass game. And I know that's something that Tanner Armstrong is going to want to establish with the New York Jets.
All right, let's jump around offensively. Tyler Johnson, the receiver who most recently played with the Rams, he signs in free agency, as does Stone Smartt coming over from the Chargers. So both those guys making the trip from the West Coast to the Northeast. Can you tell me about their potential fits?
Yeah, Stone Smartt, I love that pick. I don't know if anybody follows me on Twitter. I went to Twitter right away and was like, that's an amazing pick. A little bit surprised the Chargers didn't tender him because he was a restricted free agent. A massive human being, right? And he's able to go get the ball in the red zone. He really came on strong at the end of the year when they had some injuries to the tight end position. So again, was a little bit surprised they didn't tender him, but I love this pickup because I believe he can be a weapon down the seam for Justin Fields and also be a weapon in the red zone, going up and high pointing and going to get the football. He's an athletic tight end. Really love that signing because it wasn't like it was as far as financially, it wasn't a massive signing for the Jets. But again, when you look at roster construction and roster makeup, you need guys like Stone Smartt to have a good football team. And then Tyler Johnson is a guy that's kind of been steady Eddie. He was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, with the Rams. And it's just weird when you look at his game, EA. There's always like one or two games he just explodes on the scene. And he had that last year with the Los Angeles Rams as well. So he'll be a guy that's probably mixing it up for that number 3, 4, and 5 spot at the receiver position. He'll also give you some help on special teams as well.
He was a standout receiver at Minnesota. You mentioned that Tampa Bay drafted him. Yep. He got some time last year with the Rams after the previous season. I think most of the year he spent on their practice squad. But you mentioned Smartt and his ability to get down the field. You're seeing an emphasis of speed here, of what Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji want to do here to put pressure on the defenses. And I'm not saying any of these guys are in the category of a Jameson Williams or a Gibbs, but when you think of Wilson, and we talked about this before, and you think about Breece Hall, those are guys who can put a lot of stress on the defense. And then Smartt, when you use them in packages, you have to account for his vertical ability.
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, I think his athletic ability and ability to get down the seam, I think the Chargers realized like this guy can play some ball. Like, let's start getting it to him. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Will Dissly that kind of got banged up for them towards the end of the year. And that's when Stone Smartt really stepped up for them. So again, a very young player, was supposed to be a restricted free agent. They didn't tender him, so he became a free agent. A little bit surprised the Chargers didn't try to bring him back, and they may have, but maybe he decided he just wanted a fresh start somewhere else. So I like that pickup a lot. Again, another young player that came on strong late last year.
The Official Jets podcast is presented by Kendra Scott, the jewelry company that's shining bright and doing good. Shop game day ready jewelry styles and so much more at kendrascott.com.
What do you make about the moves up front? The Jets like their young center, Joe Tippmann. AG called him out in Indianapolis, but you're bringing a guy, Josh Myers, who not only snapped the ball to Justin Fields at Ohio State, he's got a lot of starting experience the previous 4 seasons at the pivot for the Green Bay Packers. And how about a core of 4? He's a guy who played 1 week with the Patriots last year. We don't know the full story, but previously he was a starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I got to think that he's looking at this as an opportunity to either compete at the right tackle position or at the very least, maybe he's a swing tackle here.
Yeah. I go back to what Darren Muji and also AG have kind of targeted when it comes to this free agent class, right? Okafor, we'll start with him. You talked about it, was a constant starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and honestly thought he had a chance to be, the starter day one in New England. Now, again, we don't know the story and why it didn't work out there, but it goes back to the theme of kind of like reclamation project, like a guy that had a decent or pretty good 23 season, but not a good 24 season. And you talked about it, Josh Myers was essentially a 4-year starter for the Green Bay Packers, but he's coming off a down year. Wasn't one of his best years in protection as well. And I talked about the psyche of going into free agency. Sometimes players just play a little tight. You don't know what they're doing schematically or what they're asking them to do. Was he maybe banged up last year as well and wanted to fight through some things because he was going to be a free agent? You just never know that. But for what the Jets signed him for, I think that's a home run pick. One, because, again, you talked about it, the continuity and synergy he has with Justin Fields having snapped for him at Ohio State. And when you go back to his 23 and 22 tape, it was really good. Like, he was being considered as a top 5 center in this league. So I love it from the standpoint because, yes, Joe Tippmann is amazing, but you always need a consummate backup. And then you're going to want the best starting 5 out there. Now, again, would love to keep Joe Tippmann at center, but if Josh Myers proves throughout training camp that with him at center and Tippmann at guard that we have our best starting 5, then you have to make that move, right? At the end of the day, it's about having the best starting 5 out there. And that's why I think a lot of times coaches more specifically train or cross-train guys at different positions just for that instance. If something like that happens, say you got 2 really good centers, but you can't play 2 centers at one time. You move one guy to guard and you have your best starting 5 out there. Let's not also forget, Tippmann played some guard his rookie year. So he has that. He has that versatility to do that as well. Now, again, I would love to keep Tippmann at center, but you want to ultimately put your best starting 5 out there.
Yeah, the bottom line is the Jets, you can expect them to continue to add to the offensive line. Look at where Aaron Glenn just came from, the Detroit Lions, and it all started up front for them. So let's flip it to the defensive side of the ball. How much credit do you give Muji for getting the Sherwood deal done before he hits the market? Because we were both in Indianapolis, and everybody was talking about how many suitors he was going to have if he hit free agency.
Yeah, I don't think people understood it. And I was saying that, this all last year. I was like, Sherwood's going to have a crazy market. And people were looking at me crazy. And I'm like, if you watch the tape, this young man is an ascending player, like Pro Bowl type ascending player. And you saw his trajectory year in and year out, because he would start at Sam Backer for the Jets, but it's rare in today's NFL, teams don't come out in 11 personnel, which means you're going to go nickel, which means your third linebacker is not going to play. But every time he kind of spot started for CJ, he would just continue to make plays. And I remember talking to Robert Saleh, and he was saying, Jamie Sherwood is one of the smartest players I've ever coached, right? He said that as a rookie. So you knew that the mental capacity was going to be there. He was making that transition from safety to linebacker. So you knew it was only a matter of time before he developed the more reps he got. And you saw the speed that he plays with. I mean, with him and Quincy Wilson, they might be maybe the fastest tandem at linebacker in all the NFL because those guys get from east to west extremely fast. Sherwood had 98 solo tackles, which is astronomical because he didn't even start in the beginning of the year. So, like, for him to have that type of production, there was going to be a great market. And then when you're that young and you're an ascending player because you're only a one-year starter, NFL's all about projection, EA. People are projecting that he's going to be even better, right, in the future because he did only start 1 year. So I thought that was a key piece that they absolutely had to bring back. Shout out to Darren Muji, the GM, and also AG for getting that deal done.
They got both their quarterbacks done here in free agency on both sides of the ball. They
Correct.
targeted Fields. They got him, even though Pittsburgh wanted him back. And then they got Sherwood, their Mike linebacker. And shout out to CJ Mosley, just an unbelievable professional throughout his time here, man. Yeah, the captain. Just a person who was adored throughout the building. And I'm not saying just inside that locker room. Consummate professional. He had 3 straight seasons of 150-plus tackles. When he went down, though, Sherwood was ready. And Sherwood told me, dudes, Mosley meant everything to him. And that is the circle of football life.
Yeah, you couldn't have a better vet to learn from, right, if you're Jamie Sherwood than CJ Mosley, the captain. I mean, I go back to 2019 when we signed him, EA. And that first half versus Buffalo, he was clearly the best player on the field. I hated that injuries derailed him that season because I think he was going to have a very, very special year. And then COVID happens the next year, and we miss him for the entire season. But then you talk about it, right? 21, 22, and 23. 3 straight years of 150 tackles, constant Pro Bowler. The guy, even when he was banged up, was showing up and laying it on the line. I mean, there were games that probably most players would have shut it down, and CJ Mosley went out there and laid it on the line. I vividly remember, I think it was the 22 season, that goal line stands where CJ Mosley smacked the running back from Denver in the hole. Oh my goodness.
Textbook.
Like, what that did to ignite the defense, that just encapsulates what CJ Mosley is. Like, if there's a blade of grass to protect, he's going out there to do it. That's his mindset and his mentality. So can't thank him enough. Will go down as one of the great Jets. I just hate that a few injuries kind of derailed him from being probably one of the greatest Jets linebackers in Jets history.
Well said, dudes. Brandon Stevens, do you view him now as CB2 as DJ Reed obviously exits, and he ironically is going to Detroit?
Yeah. The irony of that, right? But Brandon Stevens, another guy, he's one of those guys, like, you know how EA coaches say he's a guy that you want coming off the bus first, right? Because he just looks the part, right? I believe he's like 6'2", 6'3", and he's well put together and can run. And he's another player. We talked about Andre Cisco a little bit. I know we're going to talk about him more. Josh Myers, Okafor. Another guy that had a better 23 season where he actually showed some versatility to play safety and corner. And last year had some struggles, more specifically in man coverage. So this goes back to conversation we were having before we came on the pod. It'll be interesting to see the philosophy of Steve Wilks' defense because him and Aaron Glenn kind of different in some manners where they both like the pressure, but AG likes the pressure and go man, where Steve Wilks likes the pressure and go zone dog and go zone coverage, right? So it'll be interesting to see how they mesh their philosophies together and what this defense will truly look like because Brandon Stevens, again, and this could be a confidence thing, and this is the thing at corner, when you get beat a few times, you got to have like a mindset of a fish, and they say fishes forget things right away, but that can weigh on you as a corner, right? And I think at times it may have weighed on him last year. I think AG feels like with the tape that we saw in 23, I can develop this guy and get him out of this funk and get him back to playing with the confidence he was playing with at 23. Because again, EA, he looks the part, he can run, And again, he was really good in 23, just had some struggles in 24.
Man, I'm circling this coaching staff, especially at that cornerback in the secondary spot, because you got Chris Harrison here, you got Dre Bly in here. These guys played the game. Aaron Glenn, a first-round pick. He plays 15 seasons in the National Football League. So I'm going to be fascinated to watch the development of some of the young players in defensive backfield.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because even Steve Wilkes by trade is a defensive back coach, right?
Yep.
So I think when you talk about getting some of these guys that are young with high upside that maybe didn't have as productive 24s as 23s, well, we have guys like Dre Bly, who played in the Super Bowl, who's been a Pro Bowler. We have AG, who was a Pro Bowler with the New York Jets. We have Steve Wilkes, who was a defensive back coach by trade. We have the guys here to get these guys back to playing at that high level that they played in 23. So again, when they targeted guys in free agency, I think a lot of that had to do with the coaching staff that was put in place, knowing that they're confident that they can get these guys back to playing at the high levels they were playing at.
All right, we knew there were going to be multiple changes at the safety position because the Jets entered free agency with 4 guys who were on expiring deals. With that being said, you mentioned Cisco. He's a kid who was born in Queens. He grew up in Valley Stream. He went to Syracuse. I think his family had season tickets to Jets games, so he's coming home. I like his ball hawking ability, and that's one thing where you can point to over the last few seasons for the Jets. They just haven't had enough takeaways. Here is a guy who's athletic, who's going to play that free safety position for you. Can you speak to maybe when he was at his height in 23, what was the difference between him and what you saw in Jacksonville at 24? Because that whole defensive backfield had issues in Jacksonville. I'm not pointing any fingers, but it was the whole group there.
Yeah, we alluded to that in the beginning of this podcast, that it's kind of interesting to see what they were asking that secondary to do. And then once again, we talked about this with Brandon Stevens earlier, as a defensive back, like you got to have the probably most confidence in any other position on the field, I would say, besides quarterback, because you're going to get beat sometimes, right? But you have to let that go and be able to move on. He's at his best when he's the middle field safety. You talked about his ball hawking ability, him being able to go track the football. And I think that's what Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes will have him do here as well. It wasn't, to your point, it wasn't just him. The whole secondary, which was revamped a little bit last year for Jacksonville, I would say besides Jerrion Jones, the young guy that they took from Florida State in the draft, he actually had a pretty good year. But besides him, nobody in that secondary really played well last year. So I know this feels good for Andre Cisco to be able to come back home, a team that he cheered on when he was younger, and to get a fresh start, right? So I think that, again, AG, Steve Wilkes, Darren Muji, they look at that 23 tape and say, this guy was unbelievable as a middle field, ball hawking safety. Let's get him back to doing what he's good at and what he loves to do. So I'm excited to see him get a fresh start in New York as well.
Okay, so it sounds like the Jets are going to get Isaiah Oliver back, and I think that is a under the radar signing or agreement.
Without a doubt.
He's a Swiss Army knife, right? He can do a lot of things in the defensive backfield, and you need players like that in today's National Football League.
Without a doubt, he's a guy that can play in the slot. He's a guy that can play safety. He's a guy when you go dime personnel, when you have 6 DBs out there, he's the other guy that plays in the slot opposite of Michael Carter. So I love this. Now, the thing that sucked for him last year is he got banged up earlier in the year and missed a good portion of games. But he actually came on really strong towards the back end of the year, playing at the safety position and playing some slot corner because Michael Carter got banged up. So I really loved it. You talked about it, his versatility, him being a Swiss Army knife. I tweeted that when that deal, looked like it was coming down the pike, that I love this deal just because of his versatility. And I think we didn't get to see the best Isaiah Oliver because he was banged up. Now, he played really well down the stretch, but I'm looking forward to him getting integrated into this defense. And again, with his versatility, he could be competing to be the opposite starter of Andre Cisco in this defense.
Hey, were you and Bart Scott celebrating when you heard the Jets' addition of a one technique?
I was like, I was so happy because I've been saying this for the longest, man. Like, the defensive line, and I don't think this takes away from the Jets potentially taking a D tackle high in the draft, but we've had to switch up multiple defensive tackles in multiple years. I mean, Javon Kinlaw's gone, Solomon Thomas is gone. Before that, it was Sheldon Rankins, Quentin Jefferson. So I love the signing of Derek Nadi just because he has Super Bowl experience. This guy, before last year, I believe, was a starter for 6 or 7 straight years for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I went back and watched that Super Bowl game. He can still play at a pretty high level, like in regards to being able to get off blocks and be a tough out in the run game. And that's something that the Jets really need as well. So not only did they sign him, they signed Jay Tufele. They also signed Byron Cohart, who was actually coming off a career year with the Chicago Bears as well. So again, these are both young players that have high upside that didn't break the bank in regards to signing them in free agency.
All right, so we're going to talk about the draft upcoming in a comprehensive way. But just right now, here after a week in free agency, if you're looking at the Jets at number 7, let me throw some names at you. Okay. Tyler Warren, tight end, Penn State. Mm-hmm. Armand Membu, tackle, Missouri. Will Campbell, tackle, LSU. Mason Graham, defensive tackle, Michigan. Do you think ultimately it's one of those 4? If the Jets stay at 7.
I think there's a name you're missing on that list. Tetairoa McMillan.
Okay. The big receiver from Arizona.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those 5 names.
Okay.
If Mason Graham isn't there at 7, which, again, Jacksonville could potentially take him at 5, I think Armand Membu is a real consideration. We talked about right tackle still being a need for the Jets, and this guy is clearly the best right tackle in this draft, and it's not even close, EA.
Why is his stock rising, Deuce?
I don't think it's. I mean, it may be rising to the outside world, but I don't think for scouts it's rising. I think he's always been in the consideration for a top 10 pick. And I've talked to a few people. We go back to a few years ago when Darnell Wright. Remember, he ended up being, I believe, the first tackle taken in the draft at number 10, and a lot of people were surprised. We got to look at the NFL today. Like, it's not just about being a blindside tackle. The right tackles are getting paid just as much as the left tackles are now. People consider Lane Johnson the best tackle in football, and he's a right tackle. Right? And then you go into Detroit, and Penei Sewell, he's a right tackle as well. And some people consider him one of the best or second best tackles in football. So you're talking about 2 of the best, if not the best tackles in football, being right tackles. So when you look at Armand Membu, I just go to that Texas A&M game because a lot of those dudes on that defensive line are going in the first round. And if not the first round, the second round. And when I tell you he handled all of them and made it look easy at time, the athletic ability to run off the line of scrimmage and cut people off on the backside, and the strength at the point of attack in his run game, the physicality and the athletic ability in his kick step to hold up against power when guys try to go speed to power, but also the athletic ability when guys try to, use speed on the edge to run them by the quarterback or just dismantle them. Like, there's a saying that offensive line coaches use, pass protection doesn't have to be passive. And he fits that mold because he's not passive in pass protection at all. He's trying to take your heart out your soul. So I love it from a standpoint of how his mentality is. Now, people were worried about his height. I think he's still checked in at around 6'3", almost 6'4". They worried about his arm length. I didn't think it was that big of an issue. It wasn't an issue on tape either. So I think that's a home run pick if the Jets do take him at 7. But I brought up Tetairoa McMillan just because I think he would be the perfect complement to Garrett Wilson. Like, Garrett Wilson is going to kill you in zone coverage. He's going to spot up in zone coverage. He knows how to beat man coverage. But if you need that big receiver to go up, and it's not 50-50 jump balls with Tetairoa McMillan, it's more 80-20. Like, he's coming down with the football if it's in his vicinity. People were worried about his long speed. I believe he clocked in at between a 4.48 and a 4.55, depending on who you talk to and what scout you talk to. But for a guy that's 6'4", 215 pounds, that's plenty of speed enough. Right? I've seen him on tape on over routes separate from defensive backs. And again, his ability, when all else fails, if you just give him an opportunity to go and high point the football, that's what he can do. So when Justin Fields gets in trouble and he sees that it's man coverage on the outside because Garrett's getting double, throw it up to Tetairoa. He's going to come down with the football. So I think he could be a major need in the red zone, but also when you talk about just that big body receiver that can go up and make plays for you, that's what he can do. And People always worry about bigger receivers getting in and out of breaks. On tape, it's not an issue for him.
Man, that is a great tease for what's to come in the weeks ahead. Deuce, it was fun as always, and we'll catch up soon.